A little recipe to follow,
because and that happens to me when I'm teaching. If I don't give my students, that to do it's like, they don't get it. Sometimes they need it, but okay.
All right.
So let's start.
Yeah, and you guys. It's always easier to answer questions.
I think first of all we want to thank you both to be here. I would like to know what do you think about the conference? How were you comfortable coming here? Are you enjoying the time? Easy question.
We've
you can say no.
We've enjoyed the rain in Argentina a lot. I was really surprised. I hadn't realized there was such a strong Smalltalk community in Argentina, and I'm still not sure if I fully understand how it developed and how it sustained itself, but you have a pretty unique collection of people working on stuff down here that you don't find almost anywhere else in the world. So one of the things I've been thinking about this week is how people in Argentina like you should be leveraging that kind of special skill you've developed. So you can tell from the things I've talked about this week, I'm kind of big into people going out and changing the world and saying, don't just be satisfied with doing some little thing if there's an opportunity to do something bigger, and that, there are lots of opportunities.
Well, I think I could tell you what I think about it, but I think it's not the objective. But as you said, Argentina is. I think we have United States, we have Europe with France, and even some countries that use Smalltalk, and then it's Argentina in the world. So I agree with you. And
we have our theories of why. We go over that later. It's interesting for us to understand it too.
Well, I think one of the things of sort of this kind of the world of computing that's emerging, I actually think there are opportunities for people in smaller countries and stuff to actually have impacts, because it doesn't take that much to do something with software that's creative, and it's a matter of identifying the right problem to solve in the right way, and you can get worldwide usage of it and stuff. It doesn't take a big American company necessarily to do something.
Just like I would say also that the wonderful Smalltalk IDEs environments weren't done by thousands of engineers. It's a very small set of people. And in fact, design and implementation was done by a small set of people that were dedicated. Were certainly smart, but didn't know everything when they started out. So from looking at it from this perspective today, you might say, oh, it's brilliant. Well, people just worked through it with an engineering discipline, with an idea that let's make it work. And a lot of the values today in software development is making it work, delivering value. For example, the Agile community has that value there, delivering a value. But I think that one thing that we should not forget is that, at least for me, when I look at what was good design and implementation, is everything in the Smalltalk image, all your code was visible, right? Okay. You didn't have, like in Java today, where you package it up, put it in a jar, and no one sees what you're doing. And so, as a programmer, when I was in Smalltalk, I was very aware that it was all publicly available, and so I didn't want to leave messy stuff. So that sense of making code visible and making it able to change and adapt over time, which is certainly what the Smalltalk image requires you to care about a number of things, like how you structure it.
So what you said, it was originally a group of people, very few people that created all these. When you were talking, you gave us a great talk on the first day, but through your talk you mentioned some names of people, and every time you said my friend, and most of them are very well-known people. in the Agile community.
Right.
So it was also a very small team there that created most of the Agile methodologies, right? Like, how did you get interested into that, and why is it that a small group?
Or instigators. Yeah. Actually, I wasn't part of that first Agile manifesto. It was all it was called Angry Men. Alan Gibb is talking today about this. But I knew all of those guys. And they were, I guess I would say, people who wanted to make object technology effective. So a lot of people like Martin Fowler or Alistair Coburn were involved in IBM or ThoughtWorks. Martin was a consultant and trying to build good software. So there was just a meeting, that Alistair had, that basically he used to hold workshops on object design at the same resort. It was in the mountains in Utah. We used to have workshops on object design. We had one on, whatever the software, let's do a better way of doing software that resulted in a manifesto. Same, set of people that, what can we do about it? And I think that it's interesting that people think that it's only a small set of people, but what you really do is you have people who are always pushing at what is the next interesting thing that can cause us to wake up right and think as we do our software. And that was just that. And some of these people connect. There's connections going back lots of years, but they're also new influencers too. But there are these threads and great connections.
So one of the big connections, there's really a really big connection between Smalltalk and the Agile software development movement, particularly the XP, but really going over into all the Agile stuff, and to a large degree, a large number of the people who started really originating some of these Agile things were Smalltalk people who weren't able to use Smalltalk anymore. They'd moved on to other jobs and other consulting activities where Smalltalk wasn't being used, and they were trying to kind of duplicate the environment they worked in and thought in when they were programming in Smalltalk, where they would do, you would do things rapidly, you would experiment a lot, you'd write a little bit of code, test a little bit of code. Collective, that's right, everybody can see everything. There was all these Smalltalk practices, and there's two ways I think you can look at then what happened. One of which is to say, gee, there are a lot of guys who are just trying to preserve the work style they were used to, and so they wanted to broaden it. The other one, the more maybe altruistic way to look at it, was that they had experienced this great way to do software development with Smalltalk, and now they wanted to bring it to a broader community. But that's a very strong influence of Smalltalk that probably not a lot of people know about. They just think Agile came from somewhere, and
but it's not from somewhere.
Yeah.
So talking about Smalltalk influence, I might be a bit biased because I love Smalltalk, but I don't use it every day like most of us. But through your talk, Alan, you mentioned also at some point you said that innovation in VM stopped at some point, and then is now sort of revitalized by the web and the need for the VMs. And you also show some faces and where people come from. And from what I know, it's a lot of the same people moving around too. Can you tell us like a bit of the influence of those people in the modern world, pretty much? And you among those people, right?
Yeah, there's a person, Lee Breischauer from Digitalk. Lee. Anyway, this guy we used to work with at Digitalk. It's just not doing Smalltalk anymore, but he made the observation that it seems like there's only 50 people in the world who do. So there does seem to be a set of people you keep running into and stuff. It's interesting. You can trace from, in terms of virtual machines. When Xerox first released Smalltalk 80 out to the world, which I talked about in my world, there was a number of people who worked on virtual machines, and most of them gave up. And I kept working, and I developed the Tektronix virtual machines. Another person was Dave Unger, who was at UC Berkeley at the time, was exposed to the same stuff, and he started working on virtual machines. And there was a period in the mid to late 80s where we communicated a lot, and I incorporated ideas of his, and he incorporated ideas, and he went off and built Self, right? And at first at Stanford, and then at Sun, but particularly at Stanford, he had a set of graduate students. Some of those graduate students include people like Craig Chambers, who went and did some of the very pivotal work on how you do dynamic code optimization in virtual machines, basically code specialization that was used in the context of Self, and a set of additional set of Unger students, including a guy named Lars Bach, was a student of Unger, and they went and started they worked for a Smalltalk company that was trying to build that's right, StrongTalk, built on this technology. StrongTalk, that came out just as Java was taking off, and Sun bought them and renamed the technology Hotspot. There was those guys all went to work for Sun, working on Hotspot for a decade or so. At some point, Lars Bach went to work for Google, and this was at a time where the conventional wisdom, the people who weren't Smalltalkers, thought that JavaScript was inherently slow and could never be fast, and same way for Ruby and Python, is that they just thought those sorts of languages were inherently very, very slow and could never be made fast. And there's a few people like me and Lars and other people who weren't working on necessarily JavaScript VMs at the time, but would say, when we'd run into the people, we'd say, you can be orders of magnitude faster. We did it all in Smalltalk, and everybody said, no, it couldn't be. We don't. They wouldn't believe it and stuff. But eventually, Lars got the ear of somebody at Sun, who I think probably also had some. Not Sun, but at Google, who also had some kind of Smalltalk background connections, and said, we're going to build one of these things. And so he built a high-performance thing, and immediately Microsoft and Mozilla and everybody else is saying, well, if they're making this thing, we got to figure out how to do it too. And so everybody goes back and reads the old Smalltalk papers, the old Self papers, and start doing the same thing, only going much, much further. And one of the reasons, when I say things stopped, is that really engineering a really high-performance production, commercial-grade virtual machine is not a 1 or 2 person job. It's really a very complex, multi-person engineering effort that spans years, over multiple versions, each getting faster and faster. And so it's tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of investment over an extended period of time to do this. So when Smalltalk was having commercial success, that sort of money was being invested into doing it. But when Smalltalk stopped having new commercial customers, pretty much, and it became a legacy technologies, then the companies who remained doing Smalltalk were mostly doing more, couldn't make that level of investment, right? They're just maintaining what was there, right? And so it really took the emergence of JavaScript as really the world's most widely used programming language, and the emergence of the web is the most important platform to turn on that spigot of commercial investment that's needed to build those things. And that's ongoing.
But we're talking about the influence of Smalltalk in Agile, in the VM, and what about design, Rebecca? What do you think? Do you see that the Smalltalk spirit about design is in other communities? You see differences?
Oh yeah, well I would say that first my original work was based on observing the difference between what was the competing design thinking and objects at the time and what Smalltalk was doing. And so there was very strongly an influence of data modeling and entity relationship kind of modeling with data-driven approach versus what you saw with the really great programmers that I was just observing, and they were like making objects have behaviors and do things, and not just have data and objects that operate on the data, which is pretty much procedural style, right? And so definitely people who have written books that are popular were all influenced by those kind of design principles. And for example, domain-driven design. Eric Evans, he's said that, well, some people who, I'm a good friend of his, and he basically says, well, yeah, Rebecca is the mother of modern design. I'm saying mother, thank you, grandmother would be bad, because he's not that much younger than I am, older, he's not a kid. And so it's essentially the emphasis there on domain modeling, again, with opportunities to have rich behavior models. Martin Fowler was definitely influenced by Smalltalk programming when he was doing the health modeling in the UK. Yeah. And basically, Martin does not necessarily invent things. He's a great observer, but he has the right naming, so he is inventing. He's finding patterns. Yeah. We're talking about rich domain models, weak versus, anemic versus rich domain models is, again, having a behavioral focus on objects and design. And then the people who came up with the later approaches like behavior-driven development, Dan North, he was a small right? And they all, so test-driven development, Kent came from the Smalltalk world, and so he's basically which is only one tiny practice of all of the XP practices, but it's the one that people know about now today, is essentially defining the interface before you define the interface, before you define the implementation, which is a principal responsibility of design.
That's right.
Focus on the interface, and then the implementation becomes secondary. He's just saying, well, test it, right? Have tests that specify.
That's right.
And so it's all been kind of.
But at the same time, you can see really bad design ideas or implementations. For example, I don't know, the service-oriented way of designing applications is more like procedural with data structures and then functions. And sometimes you see that people don't get the idea of the responsibility and,
Of course they don't. And a lot of that has to do with the frameworks.
That's right.
Not to pick on Rails or Ruby on Rails, but when you have an active record where you're not separating out responsibilities between the data, how can you have behavior on this data there's no room because the framework kind of leads you into these choices where you're jangling.
So frameworks are good or bad for you?
Yes. Depends on the framework. And frameworks do dictate a way of thinking, just like a programming language dictates the normal way of thinking. Alan gave this great talk that we just heard about, here are all these things, and now in ECMAScript 6, right? But it's stack technology with the small talk class model, and we're going, well, okay, but will people use it? Because the mindset of the functional hacking may be a problem.
Well, you mentioned before that a bit of agile comes from the small talk or the short loops during small talk development, experimentation, feedback loops, trying, inspecting. Why have we lost those tools? Which comes back to, will the people use the new features in ECMA? Why have we lost the tools, the environments?
I don't know. I think that, for development environments, I love IDEs, but I'm probably old school. Right?
Well, so let me. I have a thought on that because it actually relates to VMs and such. So something people don't really appreciate. Most people don't appreciate who haven't actually worked on Smalltalk VMs. Is there are many design trade-offs that in the Smalltalk virtual machines that are there specifically to support dynamic program modification, incremental change, and those things are designed deep into the VM. So the VMs aren't simply designed to run Smalltalk code as fast as possible. They're also designed
to allow
that types of change and manipulation, and VMs for other languages, whether you're talking Java or JavaScript or, for that matter, Ruby or Python or anything else. I don't think the people who've been building those VMs have been thinking about that sort of live programming style. They're predominantly coming from text file based programming. Whether you edit that text file using something you call an IDE or do it using Emacs, it's still fundamentally creating a text file, and the execution engines are oriented towards, well, all I need to do is now suck in those text files and execute them. And so the affordances that really enable great tools just aren't there in the VM. So I think one of the challenges maybe in the years going forward, if we want to have great programming environments like that, we need to get back into those language implementation levels, some of those affordances.
Programming environments, I'm thinking about my latest experience in browser debugging and changing things. I think that people don't know what it is until they get into Smalltalk. And some of, for example, the agile practices in TDD, if I run my test, I run my code, but it's not really valued that we inspect, adapt, change, and go. We're always doing this test, whatever cycle, which again, that has a delay in it too. But when you were programming in the Smalltalk live environment, I could inspect and change values of variables as I was running some code, restart it, go on, and then, oh yeah, that would be how it would work, and then I should fix it. And that dynamic is way different than this test, verify that I got the result back. That's slow relative to that Smalltalk environment. And they just don't know what they're missing, right? And I can inspect things in my Java browser and do it, but I can't do that kind of that quick patch and fix and go and try it and restart it and try it. It's like, whoa, that was really experimentation.
Still missing.
So, some languages are slowly or some faster adopting the test runner like a tool where you can then inspect the errors. Do you think some of the tools will follow, or?
I think the Smalltalk community has a lot to offer to build us with. But I think we've accepted as a status quo that the run the test, see the result is as interactive as we're going to get, and that's not going to happen. All right. Enough said.
So this was one of the things I was thinking about in my talk yesterday, where I talked about the internet as the virtual machine of the world. Is that maybe it may be hard to get individual Java virtual machines to be as dynamic as you need to do this stuff because they're so large and so complex and so optimized for performance. But if you think of the programming environment you're working in, not just here's this JavaScript code running on this one VM, but it's this set of connected execution processes that span many machines, you think of that as your virtual image. And Smalltalk people understand that style of programming. And as you start thinking about how could you do something more like Smalltalk, but just wasn't about this local program, but was about these complex programs that we now build that are interconnecting many services and many devices, and could view that whole thing much as we've used to using. So that would be something that, you know, might really impact the world, right? That would be a game changer, perhaps. That is.
So I think we're going to end with these two.
We need to go back.
I mean, with these last two sentences. I mean, TDD is not as fast as you can go.
Right.
Yeah. And it's the image, and we have to find a way to use it as we use it.
It actually took me a while to understand what you were saying. Like the whole thing is the image.
Yes.
And it was like, oh yeah. Yeah. And it's changing, and the objects are mutating, and you can't do anything about it. And even the interface is mutated.
Yeah.
And everybody's adapting.
Well, but you know what? With the RESTful API, we can actually, if you implement it correctly, you can actually say things again to it. And supposedly, the REST properties you're supposed to get. So we should be able to kind of get repeated behaviors that we'd like. The API might change, right? Oops.
Doesn't understand.
That's okay. Does not understand.
Yeah, that's right.
Can I change? Can I catch it and fix it? Right. But the point is, if we do the same thing again, we should be able to get the same repeated result. So we can actually treat it that way. And only it's even more dynamic in that those APIs are essentially mutable over time. And so I think there's one more thing that was sort of missing from, we talk about IDEs that allow you to explore. One of the things that, Smalltalk environments had was the ability to configure and manage different versions of things. That modularity stuff isn't enough just to have modules and files, but the ability to know what's dependent upon what in a way that makes it easier so you don't have to do the ordering. And maybe we need those kind of tools for our service. As well. And I think that would be great. I'd love to be programming an environment like that. It'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
It's an honor to have you here. Have your time, and you are so open, and I would like to discuss this.
And you're invited to come wherever. Next time we promise we will look for a better one.
Okay.